Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very empowering show coming right up with special guest Melissa Joseph, and she's here today to share with us her new collection of poems, A Tender Force. Now, Melissa has been an entrepreneur, director of an ESL program, English teacher at a community college, and volunteered at a local hospital and hospice. Melissa is also the author of Moments with Baxter, a best-selling book that shares the life of a therapy dog. So let's welcome to the show, Melissa Joseph.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
What a pleasure it is to have you here and to talk about your new book, A Tender Force. My goodness, it is so inspirational. I loved it.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. I'm hoping that there are some particular poems that people like yourself could relate to in particular versus kind of at a distance so that you can kind of hold hands with some of the words.
Well, you're so right because, poetry is it's an emotional journey. It's a very thought-provoking emotional journey. And I find it, for myself at least, it's much different than if we're just reading a book because it really has you kind of pause and take notice of what's being said in the poetry.
Yeah, it's difficult sometimes to interpret it without some kind of story, some backstory that goes along with the poem itself, because all these poems were inspired by a particular moment that preceded the poem itself.
Mm-hmm. That kind of brought everything together. Well, before we dive too much into the book, I have to ask you, what was the inspiration for writing this book? Because, your first book, Moments with Baxter, talks about your therapy dog. It was really popular. So what made you decide to start writing poetry?
I've actually been writing poetry longer than I've been writing prose. I started writing poetry when I was 6 years old, and I would just write these little ditties, and I knew they weren't anything in particularly special, but they were special to me because it was a moment in time that I was expressing, and I had somewhat of a challenging childhood, like a lot of individuals out there. And so I would write about those challenges, and it helped put it in perspective for me. So the poetry that I wrote became my friend. So it became the pen and the paper really were my best friend.
Mm-hmm.
And so it came out of darkness, and then out of darkness comes the light onto the papers.
Wow, what a beautiful, touching experience that is for you. Does it feel like when you write poetry that you're just kind of in your flow and everything is just coming straight through?
Yeah, for instance, at 1:30 a.m. this morning, I got up and wrote 2 poems. They just came out of me from a difficult time that had preceded an experience that I had which was painful. So I wrote about something painful, and it just kind of oozed out of me on paper at 1:30 in the morning. And I wrote it within 5 minutes.
And when you find that happens, it just kind of happens at these different times, do you write them down and either go back to sleep or go back to what you were doing?
Yeah, I write them down. I get them out of me. I get them on paper. I print them out. I create the document. I save it. And then I go back to sleep. Mm-hmm. It's like something comes up for me, some creative force wells up inside me, and then it has to expel itself. And it does, and then it's over with, and then the poem's over with, and then the feeling's over with, yet I processed it while I was writing it. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon. I can't just sit down and say, today I'm going to write for 4 hours. If it were prose, no problem. But with poetry, there's no prompt other than what wells up inside me, and that is the prompt, and I never know when it's going to come.
Yeah, actually what's going to transpire there. Well, and when you get these different, like you said this morning, you wrote a couple lines, does it all end up coming together, or is it something that you have to then sit and add more to that just kind of flows through you?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I have little objectivity. I typically share my poems with other people that I think will be very critical, but the bottom line is the publisher. And so obviously we'll send her documents and then she will tell me yay or nay, or you need to edit this, or, take this back to the drawing board or tear it up altogether.
Yeah, be able
to. And so she's really my benchmark. I can say it felt real to me and it was good to me just because it's an expression of something that actually occurred, but that doesn't mean it's relatable to other people and that it needs to go into a book. And I'm not attached to it, so it doesn't matter if she likes it or she wants it in the book, that's great, and if she doesn't, she doesn't, and I don't take any of it personally.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I already had the experience on paper, so it's done.
So talking about your book, you have a chapter that's titled Tenderness. What's kind of the background of that?
Well, it's kind of like the oxymoron of tender force. I mean, there are feelings that are powerfully forceful within, but they have a tenderness in the center. The edge may be difficult to feel, and it may be kind of jagged, but when one gets beyond the edge, there's this tenderness, and that's where I think I go in that section of my poetry. It's a place I access that's more heartfelt, that's more sensitive, that's more in touch with a more precious feeling that's unrelated to the mind.
So, with that being said, I mean, the next chapter, because you say that there's a little backstory to each of these chapters that you have, the next chapter talks about connection. So why do you have the chapters listed the way you do in your book?
There's actually no rhyme nor reason that they would be in that particular order. We just kind of intuitively felt that would be the way they would follow one another. And so it seems to me that you can have, without tenderness, how can there be connection? Without connection, how can there be sensibility? So they each kind of feed upon the other, and they're all interrelated.
That's really beautiful, and how it all comes together. When you're writing poetry, where do you think that comes from?
Oh my God, I hope it comes from a very pure, the purest place inside of me, about which I have no control over.
Oh, it sounds beautiful. And it's interesting because when people read poetry, there's so much that they can take away for their own life. It could be, in here you have one called Breath. And it's interesting, like someone can read this and kind of just sit in the moment, in regards to what you've written in regards to breath. And it goes through quite a bit,
Yeah, someone said to me today with respect to what's going on in the world and the fires in California, and someone said, that they would rather be dead than lose their home. And for me, I said to her, the breath is the most important thing we have. And without the breath, the home doesn't matter. So why do the things take precedent over the breath? And it really took me right back to that poem, because that really is the essential force that we have to have before we can connect at all.
Yeah, for sure, without a doubt.
Yeah, we have to be fully alive, and when one really thinks about the breath, I think about full engagement.
Mm-hmm.
A whole breath, a big whole breath, and taking it all in and then letting it all out. It's kind of like the undulation of the ocean waves. It's the same experience. It's the same vibration. It's the same sound.
Well, it is really calling for people to be more present within their daily lives as well.
Exactly. I think that's the bingo of the whole book. Without that sense of consciousness of what's going on right now, then none of us is really experiencing our lives. You can't have tenderness yesterday. You can only have it in this very moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting to see how present each of your poems are, and how they fit with within each of the chapters. It all becomes one, just beautiful flow. And I know I've used that word before, but that's how it feels in reading these poems.
Well, I really appreciate your saying that, because one of the things I say that when this comes to me, it's kind of like someone turned on a faucet, and I don't know when that valve is going to be turned off. I have no control over when it's on or when it's off. It just flows on its own, and it has a certain time, and then it ends. And then there's a dry spell sometimes, literally, and then all of a sudden it's like someone turned the valve on again.
Is there a poem that sits with you regardless? I mean, I'm sure they all do. But is there one specifically that kind of stays with you? And if so, why?
There's two that stay with me. One is called The Pot Holder. And the reason why that one stays with me is because the bottom line is I want to be a useful person. I want to make a difference. And when I take something as simple as a pot holder, it is so useful, and it protects me from being burned. And yet everybody has one of these things, and we all use them at some point in time. And even if we don't use them, typically they're in a drawer somewhere, and they have a place. And so they have a quality about them, and they have a reason to be here, a raison d'etre. And so that's one reason why I really like that particular one, the pot holder, because I think we all want to feel useful. And then the other one is called Blue, and it happens to be, it is about cancer, it is about death, and it is about, the end of life, signing one's will in blue ink and facing one's death. And I think the reason why that is so significant for me, it's said that one cannot really live a full life unless one faces the concept and the construct of death. So when I read that poem, it makes me feel like I'm inside that person who is at the end of their life. And when I then, go to the last line and the person signs their will with their blue ink pen, then I think, wow, it's time for me to really put this in proper perspective and know what's really important.
Yeah, what really matters.
And it's important to be useful. Yeah. And so those two to me kind of, no pun intended, go hand in hand. And so it's, you have the bluish hand that's dying without the blood, and then you have the pot holder that's holding you from getting burned and turning red.
It is interesting to see how they come together.
Yeah. So that's kind of, those are, well, I was just saying, so those are kind of, full circle for me, right? Kind of the useful and then the not useful. How can you be useful when there's no more life in you?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. When you got these poems together, and we're talking about the pot holder, and we're talking about Blue, were you thinking of how they really come together in that way, or is this something that was
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Not at all. No, those poems just stand out very strong to me. And when you asked me that question, it was so easy to put them together because I see them as two different colors. I see one as red and I see one as blue, and then I extrapolate that to the world and the partisanship in the world and how we're so segmented and fragmented, and how I want to bring it all together, and how life and death are encapsulated. All those colors have to be all together.
Yeah. I mean, they really do kind of it's so beautiful how the book really does come together that way. It's almost like you pre-planned it when it's kind of hard to imagine that could happen, you know?
Yeah, it is hard for me to imagine it, too. I think maybe I just got lucky. I truly believe that life is not random. I have a poem in there about random. I really believe that there's some universal force, and that I think if we pay attention, if all of us pays attention, that there is something very special that happens to us each and every day. And sometimes yesterday I had 3 incredibly special moments that I noted each one of them, and they brought me to tears, and I thought, wow, some days it's not that poignant, but yesterday was supremely poignant, and it just makes me really want to be right here at this very instant.
Well, and, you have a poem called The Zen Moment. And
yeah.
When you wrote that, what was going through your mind?
Well, I think that I realized it's a perfect moment, that every moment has to be a perfect moment because it's happening. And if it's not what I want it to be, it's up to me to orchestrate it differently if I can. I mean, there's only so much I'm in control of, but I am in control of how I behave and how I treat other people, including myself. And so a Zen moment is when all that comes together, that peacefulness comes together, where I'm connected peacefully to myself, I'm connected to Mother Nature peacefully, and I'm connected to other sentient beings on the same level. And that's a Zen moment for me. And I don't want it to be any different.
Mm-hmm. That really is a Zen moment, and it's really interesting how that does come together that way,
Yeah. I mean, a Zen moment is a perfect moment, and a perfect moment is when I think one does not want it to be any other way than the way it is.
Was there another moment that probably wasn't as perfect that...
Oh my God, plenty of them. There's plenty of those moments where I struggled, and I think the poetry for me is truly a testament of the internal struggle, which is why all the proceeds are going to the National Institute of Mental Health, because I believe that growing up, that it was my mental health of my family that led me down this dark path of poetry. It was a struggle, and I think this was my venue to work through the struggle. And there's not enough mental health out there. There's not enough access for people to have mental health. There's an access to drugs, but there's not an access to other forms of mental health.
Well,
and so which is why I support this organization.
Mm-hmm. So, and I think that's really, gosh, what a very generous thing to do, is to give the proceeds of your book, to National Institute for Mental Health to kind of help with that, to kind of move things forward. Because you're right, the discussion about mental health in the United States, it's starting to take off, but excuse me, we really need to have it at a place where it's more of a discussion and not something that's done kind of in the shadows.
Or treated with medication. It needs to be, the National Institute of Mental Health really does research and how to help people, and they're a stellar charitable institution, and they're a huge research cauldron for information to help people who really are struggling. And so I hope that this poetry book lets people know that there's an answer, and they don't have to be alone, and they're not weird, they're not different, they're just struggling, and it's normal to struggle.
Yeah. Well, and it's good to get that kind of feedback, because a lot of times when people are having mental health issues, they think that they're the only ones going through it.
Yeah, it's a very lonely experience. And so maybe the book will in some way, mitigate that lonely feeling. Like I said, it will be, maybe the words can be something that people can hold on to in times of despair.
And kind of help them through.
Because I surely have despaired.
Well, I think a lot of people have despaired over the years and at different points in their lives, It's something that none of us are exempt from, because things happen, life happens.
Yeah, but it's not something that gets spoken about. It gets something that gets medicated away or cosmetic surgery away or something. There's something that in some way we think we can change the outside to change the inside.
Mm. Well, and it's interesting that you point that out, because no matter what kind of external changes we may make, it's still an internal battle.
Yeah, exactly. People are quite disappointed when they have a facelift and they are still the same person when they look in the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
The problem's still there.
Yeah, it's not going away, because they haven't really.
It just looks prettier. It looks prettier and younger and more vibrant.
Yeah, it's interesting, because happiness, really is an inside job. And when you were writing your book, is that one of the things you wanted the readers to take away from your book?
Absolutely, and there is a poem in there that's called the Happiness Recipe.
I saw that one. that actually is a good one too. What other things do you want readers to take away from reading your book?
I think there's some poems in there that are kind of funny. I want them to realize that in all the suffering there is levity. There's a poem in there called The Casket, about how we dress people up to put them in the ground. And I kind of took it and made fun of the whole experience. And perhaps it would offend some people, but I found it to be, quite enlivening, no pun intended. And so there are some funnies in there and some very simplistic ones. One entitled The Plum, for instance, about just the simplicity of something so delicious and sweet. So there's sweetness in the midst of, there can't be all this tragedy without the sweetness. The duality has to exist. And so within that dark tunnel, there is always somewhere, somehow, some light to get out.
Well, isn't that encouraging?
And for me, it was words.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad that you wrote this book, because poetry, it seems to be making a comeback. It's been around for a long time, and there have been some very great poets out there. But I think it's such a great way for people to connect with their inner self, to that flow, their soul, whatever you want to call it, that can allow this kind of, beauty to shine.
Yeah, and I think it is having a renaissance, but I think for me the biggest challenge in writing poetry is my poetry relatable, or is it too cryptic and too weird that someone will find it so evasive and so far-fetched and so amorphous that they can't attach to it. So I want people to be able to attach to some of my words. That really is my goal.
Well, I think that's a beautiful goal to have. And on that note, so we talk about attaching to your words. Where could our listeners go that they could learn more about not just this book, but the other books you've written, and be part of your community?
Well, they could go to the website, www.tenderforce.com. They could also go to Amazon, and there's information there about the bio about me, and there's also information about Moments with Baxter. Mm-hmm. So there was a fabulous article in the New York Daily News that was really very interesting, questions that were posed to me about the book. So those are some of the resources there where people could get more information.
Well, why don't you share with us a little bit about a moment, with Baxter? Why don't we hear a little bit about that?
Okay. Well, I appreciate your indulging me in that one. Baxter was a rescue dog. He was tied to a meter reader so that the meter people could not come out and read the meter. And so I was told about him and would I take him in, and someone detached him from the meter. I rescued him and turned him into a therapy dog. And we worked at San Diego Hospice and the Institute for Palliative Medicine for 7 years. And we got so into it and we were so effective as a team that we started to go there every day of the week. We couldn't help ourselves. And it was a 26-bed facility, inpatient, where people were 6 weeks away from the end of their life. That's what the requirement was to be in that facility. And so this dog, with his tenderness and his silence and his own disease, and he was later in life too, and he died at 19 and a half there at San Diego Hospice. He connected with these people's pain, and in their silence, their own silence, when they were in too much discomfort to actually talk to people, they would talk to him. So he was a real bridge between life and death. And in between, there was this love fest going on between the patient and the dog. So he was my channeler, so to speak. And without him, I would not have been effective.
He sounds like a very special dog.
Yeah, he was really special. He was really unique, and I felt like he and I had an amazing language between us. And I felt like he was able to share that language with other people.
Well, and we understand that Baxter has moved on. He's crossed the doggy rainbow bridge, and you have another dog.
Another dog. Yeah, and so I think she's Baxter reincarnated. I really do. I told her that when I first got her. She is Baxter and then some. I have never met a dog this loving in my entire life. And she is also a therapy dog, worked at Scripps Hospital for 3 years, and now she's retired from her job, and we do other things. So I'm volunteering in another capacity without her now. So she needed to retire young.
Oh.
That was her gift.
And the gift of your books and the work that you do and have done with your dogs is so amazing. And again, why don't you share your website for our listeners so they know where to connect with you?
It's www.atenderforce.com. And on Amazon, all one has to do is put in A Tender Force Poems, and they can go to the website on Amazon and find out more information. The bio's there, and Moments with Baxter is there as well. And those books can be purchased. And Moments with Baxter was also philanthropic. All the proceeds were donated back to San Diego Hospice and to San Diego Humane.
Well, Melissa, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you for taking the time to ask me such fabulous questions that had me thinking.
Well, thank you so much, Melissa. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you, and of course to talk about your new book, A Tender Force. A Tender Force is available on Amazon and also at Melissa's website, atenderforce.com. We'll have the link below, but make sure to connect with her. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.